Hello, and welcome to Anime Audio Commentary. Today I'll be commenting on episode 10 of Spy Family Season 3. If you'd like to watch along, then start watching now. Alright, last we left off, it was sort of revealed that Melinda has an unusual mental state where she sort of vacillates between loving her son and seemingly despising him. And I don't know, it's kind of hard to figure out what to make of that, but it is interesting nonetheless. Now here we have one of the teachers at Eijitan Academy, and he seems to be suffering, which is kind of understandable given everything he and the other students and staff went through. Now, some people have fared better than others, like all the students seem to be relatively okay. And in a sense, I feel like that's not entirely surprising. Kids can be resilient in ways you don't expect, and none is probably faring better than Anya herself, largely because she knew how much actual danger she was in. But nonetheless, when something like this happens, it's not unusual to seek out help, as Mr. Austin here is doing. And I suppose it's, I don't want to say unfortunate, but he's come to Lloyd Forger, which, Lloyd might be perfectly willing and able to help him, but there's also always that ulterior motive of being a sneaky spy trying to work for national security ends. So at the very least, Lloyd's putting up, a reasonable front here. It's like, look, my daughter is caught up in this. It's not unusual to need help after something like this, so let's try and get you back to normal. So already Lloyd's thinking about this analytically. It's like, look, this guy's probably influential. He manages one of the dormitories, so he probably knows a lot of students who have since become influential. So, if this guy's indebted to me, that wouldn't be a bad thing, to be sure. And to be fair, it really wouldn't be, Not that this guy would necessarily set up a meeting between Lloyd and, well, the powers that be or anything like that, but it's not a bad thing to have up your sleeve, as it were. So, we're just getting a reasonable rundown of the symptoms and things like that. And it seems to me that it's kind of vague, he's saying I think so, and not really definite. Now, the interesting thing is that Lloyd is sort of harping on these little inconsistencies, which I suppose is, part of his job. He has to be attentive, but I don't know, this whole thing seems kind of open and shut. Truth be told, I don't really remember the chapter this came from, Or at the very least, it didn't stick out in my mind, but that's probably because there's more interesting material bookending this chapter. Unless it was like one of the little extra chapters that's being adapted and expanded. You never know sometimes. Oh. That's interesting. Fiona just sort of like walked in after the guy left and says like, hey, he's lying. I don't know why she's coming to that conclusion, because, like, the guy seems rattled, and understandably so, but I don't know what would indicate that he's lying. And more to the point, I don't know why he would lie. Like, if the hijacking isn't the cause of all these problems, then what else could possibly be doing it, you know? Oh. Okay, so Lloyd's, asking the guy about his wife, which, kinda leads me to believe he might suspect her of being the problem. Okay. So, I guess, for all his problems with the hijacking and all that, it seems as though he has a bigger problem with his wife, you know? I mean, he certainly seems, afraid of, failing her, I guess, if nothing else. Alright, so where's Lloyd going with this? Is he just gonna outright accuse him? I guess he is. Yeah, it's like, hey, you've had these symptoms since before the incident, so what's going on? Start telling the truth here. And I'm of two minds about this, because on the one hand, you know, you're not going to get anything done if the patient is lying about symptoms, but I feel like for a weedy, nervous guy like this, just sort of outright accusing him of lying and being unhelpful, that might not be the most tactful thing to do, because, like, the guy has already, like, got tremors in his hands out of nervousness, you know? Wait a minute, is this really the route we're going down? Like, his wife scares him more than the bus jackers? Wow. Although, if this is how she talks to him, like, man. What a hellish marriage that guy must be in. I'm wondering if this is like anime original, to try and, set up a little juxtaposition between this guy and Lloyd, because, like, Lloyd's not exactly in a real marriage, but, you know, what marriage he does, it's significantly better than this. Although that's kind of an interesting line, you know, how could my wife be more terrifying than terrorists? And I feel like, in a way, Lloyd could probably say the same thing if he only knew a little bit more about Yor. I mean, certainly he's aware of her, athletic ability, which, you know, it does have a tendency to verge on superhuman, even if he just sort of, like, dismisses it and doesn't really, you know, connect the dots, as it were. I mean, at the very least, at least Lloyd is willing to help the guy now that he knows what the real problem is. Oh dear. So it seems like Mr. Austin here is sort of the architect of his own problems in a way, you know? I feel like there's really only so much that can be done, you know? And, like, maybe he can help the guy and try and smooth things over in his marriage, but, like, I mean, this guy said he's been married 20 years, and I feel like a lot of bad habits can become ingrained over that period of time. So, I don't know. You know, it's nice we're seeing a little bit of Nightfall. She's not exactly, a great dynamic character to follow around. You know, she can't really carry more than, like, one episode or something, but I do enjoy her from time to time. You know, just sort of, like, eavesdropping and things like that. Counting, you know, the seconds she can, you know, spend talking to Lloyd, as though something like that really matters to anyone but her. Alright, so that's some real good advice from Lloyd. It's like, look, if you want to recover, you're going to have to face your fears, and avoiding them is only going to make things harder in the long run. You know, if it's really so important that you solve this problem, then you got to face it head on. And to be fair, that's far easier to say than it is to do. Like, especially with some of the stuff this guy was recounting his wife saying. You know, talking about, like, grinding him up and stuff like that. Well, I guess he's recounting more things. You know, stuff like her brandishing a knife. Man. I feel like at some point, like, this sort of thing just can't go on. Ah, Nightfall, here we go. You know, if I were your wife, I would never do anything like that. I mean, at least she had the good grace not to say it out loud and just think it, but boy, she really is hopeless. Okay, well that's it then. Ooh, I know what we're getting into now. This is some good stuff right here. So, yours cohort, maybe that's not the right term, but her fellow secretaries are working all sorts of overtime, and now yours offering to help out. So this is kind of interesting because her coworkers, she hasn't really had the best relationship with them. And to be fair, she hasn't had much of a relationship with them, even among coworkers. Because, like, you know, coworkers, they, like, talk cordially, but, you know, Yor would tend to keep to herself, not make waves, not make friends or anything like that. Which, you know, it's fair given her actual vocation. But, you know, it's maybe not good in the long run. She did this to sort of maintain her cover, but she almost made herself more conspicuous by not interacting with any people at all. Now, the other thing about her friends, quote-unquote, is that they're not really friends. You know, they seem to, like, kind of tolerate her at best. You know, Sharon was asking about her daughter because of the bus jacking, but that's, in my mind, something of an unusual courtesy that wouldn't normally be extended. And, I don't recall the blonde's name offhand, but she deliberately tried to, sort of put Yor in her place early on in season 1. And, you know, she has since mellowed out, helping Yor learn how to cook, however haphazardly, but, you know, if I were involved in this situation, if I were in a position to give Yor advice, I would say, you know, these people aren't really friends. I don't think they actually like you very much. You know, they don't really want what's best for you. Maybe you should, not hang out with them. Oh, wow. Okay. That was quite an exclamation from Yor. I seem to recall that was, I guess, localized differently in the manga. You know, she still said something drunken and incoherent, but she didn't swear like that, a la Joseph Joestar. Oh boy. So, Yor has made the classic work function mistake here of getting way too drunk way too quickly. Granted, she seems to have had like one sip of something, but being the supreme lightweight that she is, that's enough. And now that people are starting to complain about relationships, they're starting to grill Yor. So, this is what I can only describe as a prolonged woman moment, because Yor's friends are like, they're angling to try and complain about things. You know, the blonde wants to hear how Yor's life is falling apart. The redhead wants to offer Yor the advice that she should dump her husband. But, like, all of that is completely contrary to reality and unwarranted. And when Yor is saying, like, no, my husband's good, like, it's, like, everything's good here, they're like, no, that can't be true. That's stupid. Like, he must be trying to scam you and steal your money. It's like they're doing everything they possibly can to ruin a good thing. And I mean, I don't want to be hyperbolic here, but I think that's just evil, you know? Because they're deliberately sticking their noses in to try and cause trouble where no trouble exists. And yeah, they couch it in terms like, nothing could be as perfect as this. And, in actual fact, yours relationship isn't perfect, but, like, they're just trying to stir the pot for no reason. Like, it's really unthinkable, Like, I can't imagine I would ever do that to my friends, Like, I suppose maybe I could, like, offer a friend advice if I thought his girlfriend was, like, this type of person, but, man. And the problem is, Yor is so sort of innocent and impressionable that she thinks she needs to come up with some kind of complaint to make it seem as though she doesn't have the perfect marriage. And, like, the worst part is it doesn't even work. They realize that she's just, trying to come up with something to placate them. They badger her, and then they say, you don't have to make things up to fit in. Like, man. And, they were talking about, like, committing acts of violence against their significant others. Like, little do they realize how dangerous this is because, like, if anyone's good at committing acts of violence, it's Yor. And drunk as she is, she's kind of super prone to bad ideas. I guess case in point, she decided to down her drink, one sip of which already intoxicated her. And now she's grabbing cutlery meaningfully and heading towards the door, Like, that's never a good thing when the patrons start picking up silverware with meaningful intent. It's also never a good thing when you show up to your boss drunk and say, like, look, I gotta do this, it's necessary. Yeah. This hypothetical Lloyd, at least he has the right idea. Wanting to kill me over omelets is abnormal behavior. And, frankly, few statements are truer than that when you get down to it. So, the good thing about all this is that it was merely, a sort of hallucination on Yor's part, Fortunately, the maitre d' stopped her before she could leave the restaurant with their cutlery. But, oh wow. She's kind of spilling the beans a little bit. She mentioned the owner, the guy who gives her people to kill. Like, man. I feel like this should really be a lesson, if not just to Yor, then to us all, that, like, maybe you shouldn't get really, really drunk in public. That's probably not a good idea. Man, it never ends. They just keep badgering her over and over again about all the sort of things she does with her husband, and it's like, come on. Like, there's a time and a place, and really, I don't think either of them are anywhere in public. Maybe the one, like, kind of okay thing they're doing is they're saying that, like, you kiss your husband when you go home. That's a normal thing. And, like, yeah, it is a normal thing, but not for Yor. Unfortunately, the idea that it is normal and that she's not doing it, it's gonna give her a complex. Wow, so in the end, they're just, like, kind of talking behind her back, like, yeah, she was surprisingly fun to talk to, as if talking to is how you describe something like that. Like, they just want someone around to pick on. Yor doesn't deserve that. Oh, dear. So, naturally, Yor is more concerned about a welcome home kiss than anything else, despite having sort of stumbled back home drunk to be greeted by Lloyd. He's not even, like, accusing her of anything or being hostile. Like, he just recognizes that she's a bit sloshed, and, maybe something should be done here. At least in her drunken state, Yor has the presence of mind to realize that maybe she shouldn't lash out, and that, rather than kicking him in the chin again, she should not do that. Now this is the right reaction here. How much did you drink to get this drunk? Asks Lloyd. And man. Oh dear. So even Anya sleeping is aware that stuff's going on. Now, just as a last little bit at the end of the episode, I guess, we need to learn a little bit about the space race. Because this wouldn't be a sort of retro Cold War era thing if it didn't have the beginnings of space exploration. Now, the interesting thing here is that Damien doesn't think too much of it, but one of his friends really enjoys, I guess, the majesty of the cosmos. And when you think about it, there is a sort of romance to space, exploring the last and final frontier that is unexplored. What's the phrase? Born too late to explore the world, born too soon to explore the stars, born just in time to, go on Reddit or something. Now, the interesting thing here is that Damien's friend and Anya are kindred spirits in a way. Anya doesn't necessarily care about the details of space, but she thinks it's very cool. So, really, that's all you kind of need, And I guess the worst part about all of this is that it makes Damien insanely jealous. So, he makes a bit of bluster about, hey, when I'm in charge as a politician, I'll make sure to fund the space program and all that. Unfortunately, he just kind of said it to himself here, thereby garnering no brownie points with Anya. Alright, well that's it for this episode. If you've enjoyed it, then by all means, tune in for the next one. See you, Space Cowboy.